This video explains what to expect in the Physics 1100 labs this semester. I'll be going over some lab policies and general information, and I'll also explain a little bit about how the labs work in terms of what you hand in when. Now, chances are good that you're already on the Moodle website for the course and clicked into this first Lab 1 section. In fact, you're probably watching this video right here. So I'm going to go over some policies, and those are posted for you here in the first section. So just so you know, we have a lab schedule posted here, 2 handouts, and the full lab manual. So I'm going to open up this first handout, which covers lab policies and general information. So first of all, my name's Jennifer. You can call me Jen, Jennifer, Ms. De Benedictis. It's really not an issue to me. Email is the best way to get in touch with me. I have given you my office phone number also, but I work on both campuses. It's not always easy to find me in my office. So email is the best way to get in touch with me. And by the way, don't ever leave me voicemail at my office phone number because I'll never, ever get it. So email is the best way. The labs are due at the end of the 2-hour lab period, and especially when there are back-to-back labs, your lab instructor has to be strict about kicking you out on time. So you only get the 2 hours. As I mentioned before, there is a schedule that gets posted on the lab room door. The labs mostly run in numerical order, but not always. So just heading back to the Moodle site for a moment. As I said, I've posted the lab schedule here. You don't necessarily really need this because I've already organized all of these click to open sections for the labs in the right order. So as long as you click the one for the next week down, you'll always wind up preparing for the right experiment. So as I said, you don't really need to look at the schedule. You can just look at the Moodle site here. Going back to my handout. Now this course has been set up to be paperless this semester, which means that rather than having you buy a paper copy of the lab manual at the bookstore, we're instead going to give you electronic copies of all the experiments. And you'll fill those in electronically and hand them in electronically, and then they'll be graded and handed back to you electronically. So you don't need a separate lab book or lab manual for this course this semester. You'll be provided with files instead. You will be working in a lab group of ideally 3 students, or a couple of groups of 2 students, if we don't have the right number of students to get perfect groups of 3. And you're going to work together with your partners to fill in one lab write-up, and then you hand in that one file, and all 3 of you will get the same grade. You are going to be assigning yourselves certain roles within the group, and I'll discuss this more later. But everybody in the group has a certain job that they do, and then every week you'll cycle the roles so that you're doing a different job that week. Like I said, I'll discuss this more in a bit. The labs count for 25% of your course grade, and there is a lab exam. That's Lab 8. It happens in the middle of the semester, and no, we don't have a second lab exam that happens at the end of the semester. There's only the one lab exam, Lab 8, that happens mid-semester. The pre-labs are a set of questions that you have to complete before the lab starts. So these are set up to be Moodle quizzes. So you'll do your Moodle quiz for your pre-lab, and it's due by the beginning of the lab period. You get graded individually on your pre-lab, so if you forget to do it, you lose the marks for that, but your partners in your lab group do not. Exemptions. So if you've taken this course before and you got a grade of 70% in the labs and passed the lab exam, then you may qualify for what's called an exemption, which would mean that you wouldn't need to do the labs again this semester. I could just submit the lab grade that you got last time for this semester also. However, this is something that you have to set up with me in person. It doesn't happen automatically. So if you think you qualify for a lab exemption, get in touch with me to ask about it. The late arrival policy is just that if your partners have already started working, you have to work by yourself that week, even if they'd be okay with you joining them. I won't allow you to because it's not fair to them. So if you show up late, you have to work on your own. If there's not enough space for you to work on your own that week, then you may need to complete the lab either in another lab period or as a makeup lab. But generally speaking, that's the only penalty for arriving late, is you have to work by yourself that week. Now, the missed lab policy is a lot more strict, so I want to be very clear about this. The labs are considered part of the course requirements. You have to do them all to pass the course. So I just want to be really clear about that. If you ditch a lab, you fail the whole course. So if you miss a lab for a valid reason, like you were sick, you will need to do a makeup lab. Get in touch with me as soon as you know that you're not going to make it to the lab. Ideally, email me that same day. The default is that you do need to provide me with a doctor's note, but generally speaking, if it's the first time you missed a lab, I won't require that. However, that's something I'll tell you. So if you wake up and you're too sick to come to school, email me to tell me that you're not going to make it, and I'll email back to say whether or not I want you to get me a doctor's note. And on the next page down, I've given you a little map on where our lab room is and my office. So we're on the 3rd floor, and when you come off the stairs from the rotunda, you come down this little hallway, and instead of turning left to go down the main hallway, you keep going and go to the right, just around here. This is our lab room, and my office is right across the hallway from it. I may be tucked away at the back by the windows, so you may need to come right in to find me, but if I'm ever not in the lab room and you have a question, I'm probably in here instead, and you're welcome to come in and ask me questions. And just because it's handy information, if you keep going down that little hallway, you'll find a women's washroom. If you backtrack to the main hallway, there's a men's washroom there. You can also head back through the rotunda to the other main hallway, and there's another women's washroom there. All of those are wheelchair accessible. The gender-neutral washroom on Richmond campus is on the 1st floor. You head down a little hallway on the north side of the student services area to find that. So now I'm going to go back to the Moodle page and again click into this section, and I'm going to talk about the roles that you play in the lab groups. So like I said, you're going to be working in a group of 3 students ideally, and everybody in the group has a certain role. So let me open up the lab manual. So this is on page 1 of the lab manual, and this outlines what the 3 roles are within your lab group. So one member of your group is going to be what's called the reader, and their job is to read over lab manual questions, lead discussions, and keep the group on track. Now obviously everybody in the group should be reading the question and trying to understand it, but the reader is in charge of that, so they're supposed to take a leadership role on this. The technician is in charge of setting up the equipment and coordinating with the group to take data. And again, everybody in the group is going to be helping to take data, but the technician is in charge of that process. The recorder is the person who actually logs into Moodle, opens up the lab manual file, fills it in, and then submits it for grading later. And again, everybody in the group should be talking about the questions and discussing what you're going to write down for your answer, but the recorder is the person who actually types it in and later submits the file for grading. Every week you should cycle the roles, so if you were the recorder this week, then you should be either the reader or the technician next week. And if your group only has 2 members in it, then you'll share one of these roles between you. So in the next part of the video, I'm going to talk about how the Moodle website is structured and how you find the files you need and hand in your work. But before I jump to that, I'll just note that some useful things to bring to the labs with you every week are a scientific calculator, a pen, and some blank paper. So here we are back on the Moodle website, and I'm going to click this first section for Lab 1. And I'll note that this is a little atypical because there's more than one video up here at the beginning, and I've also included a bunch of description for each of these links down below. And that's just because at the beginning of the semester, it's useful to have a little more explanation about what everything is. So this is a little more cluttered looking than a typical lab. So let me go down a bit and show you what a more typical lab section looks like. So in this lab, there's one video, and you watch this before the lab period starts. So these videos explain how you do the experiment, how you use the equipment, give you any little helpful tips for doing the experiment, and stuff like that. So you watch this before the lab starts. I would recommend watching it the night before. And then underneath that, there's 4 links. So the first link is where you can choose your lab partners for that week. And I'll talk more about this in just a moment. Underneath that, there's a link for the pre-lab quiz. So this again needs to be completed before the lab period starts. So I would recommend the night before you watch your video, choose your lab partners, and then do your pre-lab. Underneath the pre-lab, there's the link to the lab manual file. And again, I'm going to open this up and show you this in a moment. But this is the file that you open up in the lab period and you complete it with your lab partners. And when you're all happy with it, you save that file and it gets submitted to your lab instructor for grading. Where do you submit it? This 4th link down here. So you click this link and you'd upload your lab file there. Now you'll notice that right now the pre-lab, the lab manual file, and the hand-in link are all grayed out. The reason why is that you have to choose a lab group first before these are accessible to you. So let me show you how you choose lab partners. You click this link and you're brought to this screen here. Now there's a button right here. If you click this, it's going to show you the names of the people who are already signed into those groups. So right now I've only got 1 lab group with 2 people in it, and the rest of the lab groups are all empty so far. So you can choose any group here, but if you decide, hey, I'd like to work with these people, you click the choice over here, and then click Save My Choice. And you're brought back to this screen. And again, clicking here to show the members, you now see that you've been signed into this group. If you want to change your choice, you can always click Remove My Choice. And again, showing the group members, I've now been signed out of that group, and I can click a different group if I want to, save it, and now I'm signed into the second group. So try to sign up in groups of 3, but if it looks like somebody's going to be working alone, sign up in groups of 2 so that nobody's by themselves. So going back to the main page, now that I've signed into that group, you can see that the pre-lab, the lab, and the hand-in link are now all accessible to me, so they're no longer grayed out. Now, you know how I said that every week you're going to choose your lab partners? There is an exception to that. So scrolling back up, for the first 2 labs, so Lab 1 and Lab 2, I am going to assign partners to you. So that means when you click this link, you'll already be signed into a lab group. The reason why I do that is that you'll remember that you and your partners are handing in one lab report for the 3 of you, and you all get that grade. So I want you to be happy working with the people you're with. But I want to give you a little more time to get to know people in your class and work with a variety of students so that you can then choose partners that you want to work with. So for the first 2 labs, I assign you some partners, and then from Lab 3 onward, you're completely free to choose lab partners. Now, I mentioned that I was going to show you what the lab manual file looks like. For the lab manual file, you open this up in the lab room with your partners, and you will need to enable editing. And then this is the file that you're going to fill in as you do your lab. So there's places where you can type stuff, and there's also diagrams where you're going to actually sketch things. And I have a separate video about how you do this, so you'll watch that later. But as I said, this file here is what you fill in with your lab partners in the lab period, and when you're done filling it out, you save this file and you submit it to your lab instructor for grading. So I'll close that down. So that's all I want to say in this video. So I do have 2 separate videos that I'll have you watch after this. One of them explains how you fill in your pre-lab quizzes, and then a second one that explains in more detail how you fill in your lab write-up. If you have any questions about anything I've said, feel free to get in touch with me.